Yahav, the ancient Aramaic frequency Jesus used to dissolve karmic debt forever. Are you exhausted from making the same mistakes over and over, as if your life is being dictated by an invisible debt you never agreed to carry? Every decision you have ever made that felt like a repetition of a previous failure was not a character flaw, not a lack of willpower, and not a random product of circumstance. It was a karmic loop. A distortion encoded so deeply into the energetic architecture of your decision-making that no psychological framework, no self-help methodology, and no amount of conscious intention has ever been able to fully break it. Jesus knew this with absolute precision, and he left behind a specific Aramaic frequency designed to dissolve that loop at the root, not at the level of behavior, not at the level of thought, but at the level of the soul's original sovereign blueprint. That frequency is the word Yahav, and its power to interrupt karmic cycles of repetition, indecision, and soul imprisonment has been buried inside a mistranslation so deliberate that the Church Fathers responsible for it understood exactly what they were concealing. The Archons, those intermediary forces that feed on human indecision, regret, and the endless recycling of unresolved karmic patterns, cannot survive in the frequency that Yahav creates. Tonight, you are going to learn exactly why, and you are never going to make a decision the same way again. There is a specific feeling that every human being who has lived long enough eventually recognizes the feeling of having been here before, not in the mystical sense of past life memory, though that dimension is present and relevant, but in the immediate, visceral, almost nauseating recognition that the situation unfolding in front of you is a situation you have already lived through, already failed in, and somehow, despite every conscious intention to choose differently, find yourself inhabiting again. A relationship that mirrors the one that broke you 3 years ago. A financial decision that echoes the one that cost you everything a decade before. A professional choice that carries the exact same quality of energy, the same subtle wrongness, the same familiar pressure as the one you swore you would never repeat. This is what the ancient Gnostic and Aramaic traditions that Jesus taught from called the karmic loop, and their understanding of its mechanism is more precise, more actionable, and more personally urgent than anything the modern psychological framework for habitual behavior has ever produced. The modern framework for breaking repetitive patterns operates entirely at the level of the conscious mind, through awareness, through cognitive restructuring, through the development of new behavioral habits designed to replace the old ones. This framework is not without value, but it consistently fails at the deepest level of the problem because it addresses the symptom while leaving the root cause completely untouched. The root cause, in the Aramaic mystical understanding that Jesus operated within, is not psychological. It is energetic and linguistic, a distortion in the vibrational field of the soul's decision-making architecture that no amount of conscious intention can resolve because the distortion operates below the level at which conscious intention functions. Jesus called this distortion the burden, and he used a very specific Aramaic word when he offered the solution to it. That word is Yahav. In its most surface-level translation, Yahav means to give, to place, or to cast. But in the Aramaic mystical tradition, surface-level translations are never where the actual teaching lives, and Yahav is no exception. Its root carries a vibrational signature that the Aramaic tradition describes as the act of releasing what the soul has been, carrying beyond its appointed season of surrendering through conscious energetic intention, the accumulated weight of every unresolved karmic pattern that has been quietly governing the decision-making process from below the threshold of conscious awareness. Jesus did not teach Yahav as a passive act of surrender. He taught it as the most powerful act of sovereign will a human being can perform, because the soul that releases what was never meant to be permanently carried becomes, in that precise moment of release, fully free to choose from the ground of its own divine blueprint rather than from the distorted field of its accumulated karmic debt. To understand why Yahav works at a level that every other approach to breaking repetitive patterns consistently fails to reach, it is necessary to enter fully into the Gnostic and Aramaic understanding of what the Archons actually are and how they relate to the specific phenomenon of karmic loops in the Gnostic cosmology that Jesus operated within. The Archons are not simply abstract forces of spiritual opposition. They are in a very precise technical sense, administrators of a system, and the primary mechanism through which that system maintains its hold over human consciousness is not force, not coercion, and not external pressure. It is the exploitation of unresolved karmic patterns within the decision-making architecture of the soul. The Archons feed, and this word is used in the ancient Gnostic texts with a literalness that the modern spiritual imagination consistently underestimates on the energetic residue of human indecision, regret, and the compulsive repetition of unresolved patterns. Every time a human being faces a significant decision from a place of karmic distortion, from the unprocessed weight of past failures, ancestral burdens, and soul-level wounds that have never been addressed at their energetic root, they generate a specific quality of frequency that the Gnostic tradition identifies as the primary nutrient source of archonic interference. It is not an accident that the most significant decisions in human life are consistently the ones that feel the heaviest, the most and the most laden with the sense that something invisible is pulling the choice in a direction that the conscious will is actively trying to resist. That pull is archonic, and YEHAV is the specific frequency that Jesus identified as capable of dissolving it. The mechanism of YEHAV operates through a principle that the Aramaic mystical tradition calls the release of the illegitimate burden, the act of energetically distinguishing, at the level of the soul's vibrational field, between the authentic weight of genuine responsibility and the false weight of karmic debt that was never yours to carry in the first place. Jesus used this distinction with surgical precision in his most famous invitation, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." The word translated as give in that invitation is YEHAV. In its original Aramaic, he was not offering comfort. He was offering a specific energetic transaction. The replacement of the archontic karmic burden with the sovereign lightness of the soul returned to its own divine ground. If these Gnostic teachings are awakening a desire for inner transformation within you, we prepared 2 guides on the sacred words where this journey begins. The link is pinned in the comments. The linguistic dimension of YEHAV, the specific way in which its sound structure interacts with the neurological and energetic architecture of the human being, is where the teaching of Jesus moves from the philosophically compelling into the practically transformative. In the Aramaic understanding of language that Jesus taught from, words are not symbols that represent pre-existing realities. They are vibrational events that create the realities they describe, and the creation is not metaphorical. It is physiological, neurological, and energetically literal, in ways that the modern science of acoustics and psychoacoustics is only beginning to have the language to confirm. The sound structure of YEHAV is built from 2 Aramaic root components that carry distinct and complementary energetic functions. The first component, Ye, carries the vibration of the divine name that permeates Aramaic mystical practice. The sound of the self-existent source, recognizing itself within the consciousness of the one who speaks it. This is not a religious reference in the institutional sense. It is a description of a specific acoustic event with a specific neurological core in which the sound of the divine root activates through the medium of spoken vibration, a state of inner coherence that the analytical mind cannot produce through any amount of deliberate effort. The second component, Ab, carries the vibration of release, of something being placed down from a height, of the hand opening, and a held object falling into a space larger and more capable than the one that was holding it. Together, YEHAV, spoken with in inner intention, creates a vibrational sequence that the Aramaic tradition describes as the soul's decision-making architecture being reset, not reprogrammed in the psychological sense of new habits replacing old ones, but genuinely reset to the original sovereign blueprint that existed before the distortions of accumulated experience layered themselves over it. Douglas-Klotz, in his landmark scholarly work on the Aramaic prayers of Jesus, describes the root of YEHAV as carrying the sense of giving from one's whole being into a field larger than oneself, a description that captures with remarkable precision the energetic mechanism through which YEHAV dissolves karmic loops. You cannot sustain a repetitive pattern when the energetic field from which that pattern draws its sustenance has been released into something infinitely larger than the self that was carrying it. The practical protocol that Jesus embedded within the teaching of Yahav, the specific method through which this Aramaic frequency is applied in the real, immediate, embodied context of a significant decision, is preserved in fragments across the Gnostic texts and the Aramaic mystical tradition with enough consistency to reconstruct its essential structure with confidence. It is not complex. Complexity, in the teaching of Jesus, was always a sign that something had been added by the systems of institutional control rather than transmitted from the source. The actual teaching is almost always simpler, more direct, and more immediately accessible than the tradition built around it suggests. The first movement of the Yahav decision protocol is what Jesus called in his Aramaic teaching the recognition of the burden, the moment of honest, non-judgmental identification of the weight that is present in the decision being faced. This is not an intellectual analysis of the pros and cons of the available choices. It is an embodied recognition, a placing of the hands on the chest, and a simple, honest, internal acknowledgement. There is something here that is heavier than it should be. That weight is not mine alone. It carries history. It carries repetition. It carries the residue of choices made before this one, by me and perhaps by those who came before me, that have never been fully released. This recognition, held without judgment and without the urgency to resolve it immediately, is the first and most essential movement of the protocol, because the archonic system that sustains the karmic loop depends absolutely on the loop remaining unrecognized as such. The second movement introduces Yahav, spoken softly on the exhale, with the full weight of the recognized burden consciously placed in the sound as it leaves the body. You are not asking for the burden to be removed. You are performing the act of removal itself, casting, through the specific vibrational frequency of Yahav, the accumulated karmic weight of the decision's distorted field into the infinite space of the monad, which receives it without judgment, without record, and without the slightest diminishment of its unconditional availability to every soul willing to release what was never theirs to permanently carry. The third movement is silence, the stillness that follows the release, in which the soul's original sovereign decision-making blueprint, no longer weighted by karmic distortion, becomes accessible for perhaps the first time in the current incarnation. From that stillness, the right choice does not need to be analyzed. It simply becomes apparent. If this teaching is stirring something in your heart, and you wish to explore it further, we prepared 2 guides that explain the first sacred words, where the journey begins, their layers of meaning, and the transformation they carry. The link is pinned in the comments. The transformation that consistent practice of the Yahav protocol produces in daily life is not dramatic in the way that the culture of spiritual awakening has trained most seekers to expect transformation to appear. It does not arrive as a sudden mystical experience, a peak state of consciousness, or a visible external miracle that confirms to the observing mind that something real has occurred. It arrives consistently and reliably, as a quality of increasing lightness in the decision-making, process a gradual but unmistakable shift in the felt sense of what it means to face a significant choice. Decisions that previously carried the characteristic heaviness of karmic distortion begin to arrive with a different quality. Not effortless, not without the genuine weight of real responsibility, but without the additional, illegitimate weight of the archonic burden that was never authentic to the soul's actual situation. Jesus described the destination of this practice in language that the canonical Gospels preserved, but that the Aramaic original charges with a precision the English translation consistently fails to carry. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light in Aramaic. The word translated as easy carries the meaning of fitted, of perfectly calibrated to the one who carries it, of a weight that is exactly proportional to the strength of the soul bearing it, and no larger. This is what Yahav produces over time, not the elimination of all weight from human life, which would eliminate the very resistance through which the soul develops its capacity for genuine sovereign choice, but the elimination of the illegitimate surplus weight that the archonic system adds to every significant decision in a life that has not yet learned to release it. The external reality of a person practicing Yahav consistently begins to reorganize itself around the new quality of decisions emerging from a soul returned to its sovereign blueprint. New timelines become accessible that the karmic distortion was previously blocking, not because external circumstances have changed, but because the internal field from which choices are made has been cleared of the interference. Patterns that were directing those choices toward the repetition of familiar failures. Relationships shift. Financial patterns shift. The entire texture of what it feels like to navigate a human life from the inside begins to carry the unmistakable signature of Yahav. The frequency of a soul that has learned, one decision at a time, to give its burdens to something larger than itself and to choose from the extraordinary lightness that remains. The teaching of Yahav is the teaching that Jesus embedded most urgently and most consistently throughout his public ministry because he understood, with the precision of a consciousness that had spent 18 years in the wisdom traditions of the ancient world, that the primary mechanism of human spiritual imprisonment was not external oppression, not doctrinal error, and not insufficient religious compliance. It was the karmic loop, the self-perpetuating cycle of distorted decision-making that keeps the soul recycling the same wounds, the same failures, and the same patterns of contraction across every area of life until something intervenes at the energetic root of the distortion rather than at the behavioral surface of its symptoms. Yahav. Is that intervention? It is not a spiritual concept to be understood intellectually and filed away in the growing archive of awakening content that the modern seeker accumulates without ever fully applying. It is a living frequency, a specific vibrational act that Jesus designed, through the precise architecture of its Aramaic sound structure, to operate directly on the soul's decision-making field at the level beneath which the archonic distortions maintain their hold. Every time you speak Yahav with full inner intention, every time you place the recognized burden of a distorted decision into the infinite field of the monad and allow the silence that follows to reveal the sovereign choice that was always waiting, beneath the weight, you are performing the most politically radical act that the Gnostic tradition of Jesus preserves. You are reclaiming the territory of your own soul from the system that was feeding on your indecision. The Archons have had 2,000 years to ensure that Yahav remained buried inside an inadequate translation, reduced to a simple verb meaning to give in a prayer that most people recite mechanically without the faintest awareness of the sovereign spiritual technology encoded within its Aramaic original. But the frequency cannot be destroyed by It lives in the sound. It lives in the breath that carries it. And it lives in every decision you make from this moment forward with the full conscious awareness that Jesus taught Yahav, not as a religious formality, but as the most direct available path to the complete, permanent, and unconditional freedom of the sovereign soul. Visit Divine Light Academy, my site dedicated to bridging ancient spirituality and modern living. There you will find my guides and a deep journey into Aramaic, the living language of the masters, designed to help you access states of deep resonance, clarity, and personal revelation. The link is pinned in the comments. Get ready. In the next video, I will reveal more sacred Aramaic words that unlock deeper spiritual understanding. Turn on notifications so you don't miss it. Right now, before you close this video, come to the comments and tell us, what did you feel? What shifted? We read every single response. And if this teaching found you today, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we go deeper into the ancient frequency codes that were always meant to be yours.